Right, welcome everyone to our latest podcast. Today we've got Chris Ridge. Welcome, Chris. You're here again for a second time, albeit in a different role now.
That's right, yeah. Thank you, Jake, and it's great to be back.
Yeah,
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, so it's quite an important topic today. It's obviously based around sustainability and obviously with a particular focus on the various space heating options from a thermal insulation point of view. So I suppose if we just get into it then, Chris. So like I said, you're in a different role now from the last time. So you're now working for the organisation TICAT. So is it TICAT?
It is, yes. TICA.
TICA. Okay, yeah. So if you want to explain what TICAT is.
Yeah, so it is the Thermal Insulation Contractors Association. So we are an association who represent our members, and our members would be thermal insulation contractors in both the HVAC and the industrial markets. So these are the people that would insulate pipe work and duct work and such like, typically working for M&E contractors, and very much the customer base that Midfix have, of course.
Yeah.
So we also we have an apprenticeship scheme. We're very much looking to the future in terms of that skills gap scenario, and trying to bring as many apprentices through as possible, and making sure that those skills are adequately passed on as well. So
when you say when you say skills, it's what skills in the best way of doing things, or is it the actual install?
Yes, so we have a training centre up in Darlington, and we have, if you can imagine, a large sort of shop floor area that has a multitude of rigs, and where apprentices can learn to insulate, but also clad the pipework. So there's a lot of skill involved in this. So it's actually cutting metal and things like that as well. So it's there's a 2-year training program for apprentices at various stages, and the idea is that we are trying to feed the industry with good people who understand what they're doing, and that is really important now, of course, because without getting too much into the politics of things, I think we've all seen a shift in the labour market now, where labour in general is very, very difficult to get hold of, and what we're really looking to is the future with this, and ensuring that we have adequately trained people. We have competency running right through this industry, so that when M&E contractors are effectively looking at the insulation package, they know that the companies they're employing, if they're TICA trained apprentices, then they know that they're going to get a good quality of workmanship coming through the industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously you've probably seen ourselves a huge push on training. I mean, that's a different topic, but it's something you can't control. So I think it's very, very important. All right. So obviously today we're mainly going to be talking about space heating.
Yes.
And obviously we see in the media about the target in 2050 to be net zero carbon. So why is the heating so important, towards hitting that goal?
So if we look at the UK's carbon footprint as a whole, space heating in buildings actually constitutes nearly a quarter of that. So it's a huge proportion of the UK's carbon footprint. We're just probably beginning to appreciate that now as we get into the winter months.
11th hour.
There's talking 11th hour. There is a lot to do. We've been talking about this for years, and I think with COP26, again, taken away from the pure politics of it and the international, political stances that are being made and the reporting on it, I think you can see there's a genuine buzz in industry to try and do something positive here, and it's a real requirement to do so as well. So we are talking a lot that needs to be done. If we look at 2050 as our finishing point, actually a lot needs to be done just in the next 10 years to make it even possible.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a huge emphasis on this. And one thing I would say about that is that even if, again, if we part the politics and, the international sort of viewpoint on carbon reduction and climate change, then there is a real drive, and there's a lot of things happening in a short space of time in the market. This will really, really affect our market, the construction market as a whole, but also what happens with mechanical and electrical within that, and obviously for my part, what happens with insulation as a key sort of enabler within within that whole drive as well. So,
all right. So obviously, it's you're particularly focusing on the M&E.
Yes.
Market. So what does it mean for the M&E contractors? What are the the various options available, or what should they now be considering seriously going forward?
So the government, as of about 3 or 4 weeks ago, released the heat and building strategy, which has helped to shed a bit more light on this, and they're focusing on a number of ways that the space heating requirements of a building can be met through more and more efficient methods. The big thing, as you've probably heard through all the media outlets, particularly when COP26 was going on, is that gas has got a limited time span now, and what we do to replace that is not an easy thing. So you may have heard a lot of talk about heat pumps, for example, and that's going to be an important part of the puzzle. Well, when you speak to various people about heat pumps, yes, it will be, but there's a lot of work to be done with that as well. And then when you look at hydrogen as well, then it could be a natural replacement for natural gas, as it were, and a way to greenify the system, the existing system we have. But again, that's not going to be ready for a number of years. We're talking into the 2030s before we have a situation where hydrogen could even be considered as an option for domestic purposes. So what we've really got coming out of the government's heat and building strategy is very much a commitment towards heat pumps. This is where you may have seen that the government are talking about 600,000 heat pump installations per year by 2028. At the moment, I think we're on about 35,000 heat pump installs a year, so that's like a huge
Big
increase.
Jump.
So the answers can't just be heat pumps either, and heat networks, which has been for a few years now, and I think will remain a very important subject for the thermal insulation industry. That has to do some heavy lifting as well. Heat networks are going to be really important, and we could probably talk about defining heat networks and everything else. But just to, if you like, just to sort of underline where we're at the moment. So the options we've got: hydrogen isn't ready. Direct electric will continue to be part of the solution in certain areas. Obviously, we're both, we talked about this before, but we're both Birmingham based, as it well. I'm Black Country. I'm from the sunnier side of Birmingham. But if you look at Birmingham and a lot of the residential builds, the larger residential builds in Birmingham, they've been direct electric sort of fed, as it were. And the issue with direct electric is that in terms of the operational performance of direct electric, it's a kind of what you get in, you get out of it what you put in terms of you're using the electrical grid, and you're not getting any further benefits. It's effectively what you put in you get out. The problem with that is there's so much to be done around the electricity grid to keep improving things, and more of that is going to be put aside for things like electric vehicles, and so there's a real balancing act that's got to be done.
So that's, if you like, a bit of maybe a temporary solution at the moment, would you say? So as in, maybe not temporary, but it's never going to be the solution, is it?
Yeah, so in all honesty, the situation you've got is that no one solution can be the whole solution, and direct electric will have a part to play, certainly. Heat pumps, because of the coefficiencies of heat pumps, effectively for every unit of electricity you put in, you get 3 units of electricity out. You can do a lot more with that amount of energy than you could with direct electric feed, and that's one of the reasons why heat pumps are going to be an important part of the process. But the key thing with this is that it's not going to be a one solution fit for everything. And of course, what we're really interested in with the type of, both the type of work that the thermal insulation contractors that I work with, and the type of installs that you get involved with, we're not talking your single unit domestic properties. There's a whole set of things to work through there with your typical domestic property scenario, but we're talking large residential,
commercial buildings,
and commercial buildings.
Yeah.
And that is where heat networks are going to really start to come into play, because what heat networks allow you to do is to sort of diversify the heating scenario a little bit. So it's not just a case of running directly from the electrical feed. It's actually from the grid. Sorry, but it's actually that there are some really clever ways of generating heat from things like waste to energy, which are quite well understood already, of course. And I know that's something that you've looked into yourself, but some really clever ideas now. So, for example, mine water and taking like river water basically, and actually the latent heat from rivers and mine water and things like that, and actually putting that through a heat pump process to create a heat network to feed the buildings.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The key thing with that then is, of course, once you've got that heat there and ready to go around a building, you've got to make sure that's well insulated.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And
so if you want to go into that, So it seems as if then this is a good solution for your built-up areas. So, but how does it work what's the benefits from an insulation perspective? So,
I guess, well, what I would say is turn the question around a bit and say, what happens, or what's important about the insulation in terms of these heat networks, and what happens if you don't do it properly, I guess. So if you can imagine, what we have is we have a heat network scenario where, and heat network would be defined as pretty much anything where an occupied unit, as it were, is or a number of occupied units are built from the same source. So a decentralized heating source that is piped into that community or that block of flats or whatever it is, and a number of various occupied areas being built separately.
Yep.
So it means you're not having a boiler or a heat pump or anything like that per apartment.
Yes.
You're having it centralised. And that then means you've got certain aspects to consider. So you've got to make sure that the heat from its source to the point of the actual building is correctly insulated. That'll be things like underground pipe work that people like Log Store do, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But when it then goes through to the building sort of incoming sort of plant area, as it were, and then through corridors and risers, and basically between the heat exchanger and the heat interface unit of the apartment. So that area is known as a secondary heat network, and that is where you have heating pipe work at anywhere between, say, like 55 and, say, 80 degrees being pumped around as a sort of a communal living area, as it were. So that's corridors, risers. If that is not adequately insulated, first of all, you get a lot of heat loss, you get a lot of energy loss there, so it's costing money.
Yeah. So it's not efficiently heating the individual. It's already losing its energy before it's reached its final destination, basically.
Exactly. So everything has to work harder to make up for that, for a start. Okay. And yeah, it's effectively, you know, that lost energy is useless energy.
Yeah.
It's not like if it was in here in an exposed pipe and the pipe is, you know, exuding a little bit of heat that we might find useful. Mm-hmm. It's in corridors and risers where it's doing no good at all. In fact, it's actually detrimental, because what has typically happened is if you imagine so much work has been done around building insulation now, and the air tightness of buildings, actually that heat in the pipe work, as once it's got through the pipe work and into the corridors, it's got nowhere to go. So actually what it's doing is it's overheating corridors, overheating risers. I've been to apartment buildings where the residents are complaining that the corridors and the risers are just too hot.
Yeah, I remember my friend in Manchester, student accommodation, when he just moved in.
Yeah,
obviously years ago, and I remember it must have been the same issue before. I was actually in the industry, so I didn't know nothing about it.
Yeah,
but looking back, I know now what it was. But I remember his corridor was so hot, and it was poorly insulated.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's important to get this right, and so at the beginning of this year, CIBSE released a code of practice for heat networks, CP1 code of practice for heat networks, and it puts in some exacting performance criteria for insulation, and it's one of the first times I've known, really, since working within the insulation market, that it's had that sort of real sort of external to the market influence, saying we need to get insulation right.
Yeah.
And it's part of this growing understanding that whilst people are very, as we know with the protests that have happened recently, people are very conscious about building insulation. People are hopefully just beginning to understand the importance of getting the pipe insulation right. It can have a huge impact in terms of reducing heat losses and reducing the carbon in a building. Mm-hmm. So this will be a big part of the solution. We're talking 50 mil thickness of insulation typically on the pipe work. So that means the blocks and the clips that you're typically talking about are going to start to get a lot bigger, and what
about from a space issue then? If everything becomes wider,
so
are we going off on a bit of a tangent? Is that a different?
No, it's a good question actually, and I think one of the things with that, when you have a situation where the code of practice is saying 50 mil is a sort of a minimum insulation thickness on pipework, actually that's hopefully something quite robust then that architects can use and consider in their plans. So what eventually. So I think what's always happened is that this is where we always see the inquiries coming through, isn't it? Well, we've got a ceiling void, and we're running our LTHW hot water services, and then we've got our cold water pipe, and it's a whole sort of spaghetti junction of pipe work that's sort of passing through there into the various apartments, and there's never enough room, so you end up having less choice in terms of the insulation you use. Very often you can't even insulate to the thickness it is going to meet the British standards. Well, actually what this should allow us to do is hopefully get that early engagement and get the understanding with architects that they're going to allow that room.
That is the key, isn't it? Early engagement. I mean, if it's down to the contractor, you can't be blaming the contractors at that point. It needs to be right at the start, doesn't it? The architectural stages. If we're talking about space,
yes.
How will this ever happen? It's if we don't get them on board, we can't point at the contractor. Then you know what I mean? It's.
there's
good luck with that. But it's inevitable. You know, I think we've got to. They've got to. I think.
Yeah. I mean, the sort of the interesting aspect then of CP1, this code of practice, and talking about the whole early engagement side of things. Actually, that is a really key thing. So, what the code of practice basically dictates as well is a kilowatt hour maximum limit per dwelling that then is significantly affected by the not just the pipe insulation, but also the temperature of the pipe work, because obviously if the pipe work is running at say 80 degrees and you know, you can then maybe use a heat pump technology and bring that down to 55 degrees, and you know, there's going to be a lot less heat loss potential from that. But also that whole, if you like, that whole interface of what you do with the service temperature, the insulation that goes around that, and how that affects the actual specific project, that needs to be done at the earliest stages of the project. That needs to be done at early design. And in fact, what it means is that the manufacturers of insulation products are actually going to have to declare their, if you like, do a technical calculation and say what the watts per metre heat loss for that particular project is going to be, with that thickness of insulation, with that temperature of pipe work. That needs to be built into the calculation. M&E contractors are going to have to take that and work with it. And indeed, it should be easier, because we all know what happens typically is that a specifier might not get too detailed about things like the insulation performance, and it's left to sort of a design and build approach, and it gets left to the last minute. Actually, if it's in there, if it's in the design and it's set in stone early stages, then effectively it's only going to go wrong if somebody breaks a specification. And that's going to be more and more difficult to do.
It will. I'm sure not many people are challenging specs anymore. You know, it's it's a lot of responsibility there.
And I mean, just on that point as well, I would say it's imperative that we do get to a position where this is policed as well. If we circle back round to the this whole drive to net zero 2050, almost see it as every building that's being built now. If you imagine a balance sheet, and any building that doesn't meet that criteria kind of goes into a liabilities column, as it were. Any building that is built either 2050 ready or 2050 enabled, i.e. with a few simple improvements, it will be 2050 ready. You know, that the difference between those two is huge, because if we keep on putting more and more buildings in that column, we're never going to get there.
Sure.
So
we need to start as we mean to go on, basically.
Absolutely, and start now.
No, we do. Okay, so from a sustainability perspective, is there anything else, you know, which we could tie in with this?
Yeah, there's always other things we can tie in. You know, just first of all on that point of CIBSE CP1, then it's definitely it's definitely a case that manufacturers are going to have to step up and show the thermal performance and show what that works for that particular building. So that will help. It will have a knock-on effect on things like other products that should be considered. Pipe supports, for example, thermally efficient pipe supports that match the system rather than, say, wood blocks. That'll be an important thing. Not having clips directly on the pipe work. All these things will be important facets of getting a heat network product right. And just to part that one as well, really, I mean, this is something that it's a code of practice, but actually heat network zoning is something that's going through. This will be legislated around, you know, and this will be happening in any sort of urban conurbation areas that are suitable to, you know, heat networks. So we're going to see a real difference with that. I mean, in terms of some of the other environmental factors that sort of kick in with this, I think one of the things that we're not talking about enough at the moment, but something that I think will take a greater precedence as we go on is embodied carbon.
Yeah.
So I think you've had other guests from companies like Sickler and Zipclip and people like that on to talk before, and any system that can, if you like, reduce the amount of materials that are being used is and to do so correctly, of course, is going to have a benefit. There's going to be a huge drive towards showing what the embodied carbon is in your manufactured product as well.
Yeah.
And
we were speaking to a principal contractor recently, and I was like, this now is like one of the most important things when they're tendering for these projects is demonstrating their embedded carbon, or they've actually done some level of due diligence, towards it.
Yes,
but it needs to be done. And it's good. It's good, and like you said, it's going to open up, avenues for these, these innovative products, if you like, the way we can reduce material, reduce weight. It all contributes to, even though it might only be a small part of the overall project. If everyone's doing their bit.
Exactly. I think if you look at why it's important, then what you'll see from the sort of the UK's carbon reduction sort of timeline and the various charts is that the operational carbon reduction thing is a thing that everybody's focusing on at the moment. That's where this huge sort of reduction needs to be done with heat pump technology and things like that. But what's left after that is a huge chunk of embodied carbon, and so the work needs to be done now to get that ready. So if we only look at the operational side of things and we don't address embodied carbon, then we're going to end up very much we're not going to get there. We need to start the journey now, because it's probably a more challenging one to face in a lot of ways. So and I mean, from an insulation point of view, it's worth pointing out as well that and from a HVAC general point of view, I think that the emphasis on embodied carbon is going to see maybe more of a concentration on retrofitting buildings rather than building new all the time. If we were to look at the world in 2050, then effectively 80% of the buildings that will be around in 2050 are already built.
Right.
And how many of those are carbon neutral? So how many of those are sorry, I should say net zero carbon ready? How many? No, very, very
dread
few.
To think.
So
what happens? So all of those then. So we've built all of those over the last couple of decades, and now we've got to spend the next couple of decades refurbing them, upgrading them.
Absolutely. Whether that's retrofitting with different heating technologies, I mean, I guess if you like, the ideal situation is if you can replace gas boilers with heat pumps and all of that. It may not be possible in some circumstances, and we've got to hope that hydrogen is also, I mean, there's a lot of work going to be invested in hydrogen, but if none of those things are possible for certain companies in the next 10 years, well, what else can they do? Well, they could start by making sure their insulation is that the pipe insulation is adequately installed. Is a piping system insulated? Are the valves insulated? A really, really simple thing to start with would be to just make sure all the valves have got a valve jacket over them. That could make a huge difference. And it's, you look at all the uninsulated and underinsulated pipe work. If you were to take, here's a fact that I'm going to that you can try and fact check later on, actually, and I'll make sure I get this right. But
careful.
Yeah. So if you were to take all of the lost energy from inadequate pipe insulation in industry, so that's just UK industry. If you were to take that, you could and insulate it correctly. That would be enough energy to effectively heat 863,000 homes in the UK.
Just if it was done properly, basically.
Yeah. If you think power generation, industry, all of that, there's so much heat lost from those applications that, you could...
Wow. But surely that's impossible to get to 100%. It's virtually impossible, is it?
Probably, yeah. It's like anything, isn't it? But the first 80% should be manageable. Yeah. And why isn't it being done?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that's something to consider, and that's just industry. You know, the commercial, residential sectors doing this right is massively important. So for all the reasons that people are getting very excited and agitated about building envelope insulation, it would be really, really good if everybody started taking notice of how important pipe insulation is, and indeed the M&E contractors who sit in the middle of that, who are working on all these large buildings for the main contractors and employing thermal contractors to do that bit of work, as it were. That is something that they're going to have to start really taking seriously, because that could be a huge difference in terms of the energy performance of the building. And indeed, if they get it right now, they'll beat all the sort of the regulation and standards that sort of coming down the road to help with that, and they'll be on the right side of things anyway. So my suggestion would be there are some really good thermal contractors out there who understand what heat networks are aiming for, and speak to them about the specification at early stages. Yep. Yes, it should, I know price is always going to be a factor, but actually that, when price is the only factor, you know what, so many things are missed, and that's going to start hitting contractors in the pocket.
I don't think price, it's very short-sighted to look at price. Yeah. If you look at, say, they might save a bit of money up front, but long term, if you're going to have to upgrade it and all of this, or if it's not as efficient, what are you saving really? It's really short-sighted. It's quite frustrating when you price over sustainability, if you like.
Yeah, because it's actually it's the cost of doing things that is really important, and what we need to do is look at the overall cost of a building, and actually to ensure that the M&E services are as efficient as they can be, which obviously means insulating correctly. That means that a building would cost a lot less over the lifespan, and exude a lot less in terms of carbon into the atmosphere. So when people talk about price, the initial capital cost price and nothing else, but they're actually just they're robbing the future for
exactly.
For the
I think cost is only an issue if it's not planned for.
Yeah.
If they plan, you said before any contract's awarded, any main contract's awarded. Yeah. If it's done properly and designed correctly and allowed for, should hopefully be enough money in the pot. You know, and
well, exactly that. And it's the cheapest cost or price that comes in is usually the one where somebody's missed something. Yeah, and that's probably and I've seen it. The specific examples where that's because somebody has missed the level of insulation that's been required for that specification. Yeah. And then two things that can happen: either the contractor gets hit in the pocket because you've done this wrong, you need to go and amend it.
Yeah, at your cost.
Yeah, which is never as straightforward as it sounds. Or B, they get away with it,
and you've got not an efficient building.
Yeah, and so that problem is passed down to the occupant of the building.
But it'll probably go unknown though. In most cases, you see, that occupant is probably not going to realise that they're losing heat. Do you see what I mean?
I do, but again,
unless there's some extreme cases when.
They're not even extreme, though. I don't think, Jake. I mean, there have been so many cases of overheating in buildings with heating pipe work that every contractor that will listen to this will have come across that situation. Yeah. So we know what we need to do, and we know, and importantly, from everybody's benefit, we know why we need to do it. We know what the costs are if we don't. So
Yeah.
so getting that right, early engagement, speak to a thermal contractor early stages, and the same goes for the main contractors and M&E contractors. You know, it all needs to be done earlier, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And
you can't stress it enough. I mean, that's all we say.
Yeah.
Early engagement is so key, because at that point you can decide, is that option viable? You can, you've got, that's when you've got the time, not at the once you're on site.
Yeah.
All right then. So I don't think you mentioned modern methods of construction yet. Obviously, it's a bit of a buzzword, builds topic at the moment, and it's certainly key in, towards this target of in 2050.
Yeah.
So what have your views on that? Surely that's going to be a part of the solution.
Yeah. So I would say that TICAT represent an industry that has probably not so far benefited from modern methods of construction, and therefore maybe doesn't see the bigger picture necessarily. I think, and I think to a certain extent, that they'll see the benefit when it's done properly. In my point of view, we know it's important. We know that if we can, and just with labour shortages and reducing the environmental impact of less lorries on site, and all these kind of things, we know that it's a sensible thing to do. We know with the modern technologies of BIM and computer technologies that a lot of the problems can be sort of ironed out before we've really begun. But I think what has been missing from the conversation is that at the moment, offsite and when particularly from an M&E point of view, the offsite and the on-site elements can sometimes be a little bit siloed. So let's say, for example, where we are today, but just in the general sort of Midlands area, there are a lot of offsite companies, and they might be doing say like riser modules for anywhere from Edinburgh down to London, and still make that work efficiently, of course. But the problem then is that when, say, like a riser is maybe insulated off-site, and then the thermal contractor isn't involved with that process, and they're only involved for the on-site connections. Well, first of all, how do you decide? Different regions might have different material preferences. It might be the same type of material, but it might actually be a different manufacturer, and that can put from a golden thread perspective, that can put a bit of a fly in the ointment. But what actually happens when you've got your riser module or your corridor skid actually installed, and then the thermal contractor has got to connect up to that, and those junctions, who do you go to if there's a problem there? Is it the off-site? Is it the on-site team? And what's missed right in the outset is actually who's looking at that whole design. We all know with things like, for example, projects where the pipe supports have been sized like this, and then the pipe insulation has been sized like this, or and there's always those coordination issues. It's all back to early engagement with a thermal contractor. And what I would suggest is that modern methods of construction are massively important, and off-site rigs for risers and things like that are probably a really, really good way of saving time and energy, but they need to have the involvement of the thermal contractor that's going to do the on-site element. Otherwise, how do you how do you make it all stack up?
You lose that golden thread, don't you, basically? Which is what it's all about. Exactly. So I think that's important. So and I think once our thermal contractor members see that and see the benefits of working in that way, then I think that makes sense. What they're seeing at the moment is getting the tail end of a job and going, well, I can't be accountable for all of that, but you're going to make me potentially accountable if I don't get you to sign this bit of paper and what have you. So it's all moving it in the right direction, isn't it? So and I suppose another thing with modern methods, or even more importantly off-site, is from a training point of view, like you mentioned about the installation, it's so variable. If we're doing that off-site in controlled environments, can you go through a checking procedure afterwards, just to ensure that it's done properly. You probably don't have as big a duty of care when doing that on site, just purely because of the environment you're in. It's you've been on site, congested, they're busy. But if you can do that off-site and prove that you've followed the installation guidelines, again, that's going to contribute towards efficiency, I suppose.
Exactly, and as long as you have the early engagement there, and you maybe have the thermal contractor installing that off-site or checking that against a specification and having a presence there, I think you can potentially cover that ground. But I think that's what it needs anyway. There's probably a bit of wrinkles that we got to iron out with that one to make it perfect. But yeah, I think you can see where I mean. Just on a related note as well, we're talking about sort of the environmental side of things, and something that a lot of small and medium-sized contractors are going to look at is their own sustainability journey and net zero carbon. So
social value and all this is quite important now as well. Okay, Chris. Well, we're coming to. Is there anything you want to finish on as we come towards the end of this podcast?
I suppose really I kind of preempted that just by saying the last question, didn't I? Yeah, it's like the last statement, and I would say, with small, medium-sized companies, that I think one thing to really emphasise with that is that with the construction playbook and with a greater emphasis on net zero carbon for public sector works, we're now talking anything £5 million and above as a contract value. The main contractor is going to have to show their own net zero carbon strategy and how they're going to get there. You can expect that to go certainly for your sort of typical mechanical electrical customers, that they're going to start seeing that work through to them, and then our members are going to see that as well. So we're going through that journey at TICA as well, at TICA House. A few of the things that we've done, by the way, is we've recently installed solar panels at TICA House, and they will feed all the electric vehicle charging points. So that is, we'll be charging our admittedly small fleet of electric vehicles with the energy from the sun. We're not, and there'll be some left over to sell back to the grid. That's just one of the things that we're doing. Lots of small but meaningful steps.
And if everyone does those small meaningful steps, it's that's what we need.
Absolutely, and it's something, a journey we're going through, so that we can show our members what that's going to look like. And I would suggest that that their customers are going to have to do the same thing as well. So it's a journey we're all going to have to go through, and but it's an important one, and it is. Feel good to be part of the solution.
We have to, like I said, I think it's our duty to do our bit. We've got this little platform here, and it might change a few minds, but it's really important. So
absolutely,
I hope everyone's enjoyed today. It's a very important topic. If there's anything, obviously, Chris, I'm guessing would you be available on a consultative basis if there's anything from a sustainability point of view? Is that something you would consult with? I'm guessing, obviously, your members, you would anyway.
Absolutely. So we're here for our members with that, and the reason we're going through that journey at the moment, or one of them, is so that we can help our members through that process. I think then there's a wider conversation about where does it end really, because our members then might find that their own customers might have to start looking at things like improving the insulation in their own offices to help on their own net zero journey. So all of these things could absolutely start to
snowball.
Snowball out a little bit. And absolutely. I mean, with things like this, and certainly to help guide M&E contractors in the right direction in terms of suitable thermal contractors, obviously from our membership base, and we're here to steer in the right direction. Probably, as it's just me on the technical side, I can't review every spec or anything like that, but I think we have a role to play with that. And I think as TICAT we also have a role in terms of engagement with all of the manufacturers.
Yeah.
You'll be familiar with some of them yourselves. You know, it's not just Kingspan. It's Rockwell, obviously, who are involved in the pipe support market as well, and you people like Armacell who also have a
they all need to be on board basically.
Yeah. And they've all got a part to play, and it's all about collaborating and communicating together, because there's a bigger thing than our own individual rivalries now. This is what we're all going to try and do to
join together and make it happen.
Yes.
Well, Chris, thank you again for your time. It's been very enjoyable.
Good, thank
you.
Hope
to
Jake.
See you again soon.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure catching up. This time next year again, maybe. You never know.
That's it, you got it.
Yeah.
Cheers,
mate.
And Jake. Thanks, Chris.
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.